My name is Rob McFarland. I'm the coordinator of European Studies. Welcome to our semi-annual, actually it's more than that, it's a semi-semestral, whatever you say that, our Cafe Europa. This is a different kind of presentation. We do not want lectures here, and all these guys have been working on it. What we have done, we want a discussion. Our idea is that Europe brought us Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre and all the people who, Volta, Benjamin, who sit in cafes and get lots and lots of stuff done. And the cafe is where, if you do it right, something that American students, I have to get them into the groove. Sitting at a cafe is just hard for as long as Europeans sit. Am I right, Marie-Laure? Whereas Europeans are ready. They come, they're ready. They know what it means to sit and to enjoy. And so Americans, it takes a hot minute until we're in the mode to sit. You know what I'm talking about, Maya, right? To sit and enjoy an afternoon of discussion and enjoying yourselves. My kids, like to eat and take off. That's why I made them check out all of the Asterix and Obelix books from the library, take it to a cafe, and they would work their way slowly through those so I could get them used to the pace. And so this is supposed to be a discussion. This is first of all going to be a discussion between our guests today, but afterwards, at about 22, at about 4:40, we're going to ask you to join the discussion and to ask some questions, make some comments, however you want to do it. We welcome, just testimonials or however you want to participate in the conversation. The first thing I'd like to do is to thank and welcome our guests who are our panelists today, who are going to be chatting with us. Or I like to say guests because they're across the table from us. This is less than a panel. This is more of an encounter. So first of all, the person whose idea this was and who has driven this forward, this is Bob Hudson from the Department of French and Italian. He teaches French, and he's a kebab guy. If his street food that he is looking for is going to be a kebab. I personally don't eat doner kebab outside of the city borders of Berlin, and I don't eat Wiener Schnitzel out of the city. I'm a purist, so everybody. So that is where we are. And next we have Marlene. I'm totally blanking. You told me. Oh, I know. I remember. This is Marlene Esplin, and she loves tacos. She loves a street food that is from our part of the world. Although increasingly tacos are available just about everywhere, and that's kind of one of the things we're talking about today is how Europeans feel about that taco intrusion. And finally, we have Marie Orton, and although she is Utah's unofficial queen of gelato, and I won a gelato tasting contest at her house when I noticed that it was the small yellow plums that grow on the trail south of campus that she made that gelato out of. And so I won. But she tells me that gelato are not street food and that she likes falafel. And we have falafel street food in the Marais planned into our European Studies study abroad that we're going to be leaving on here in a couple weeks. So this is Marie and Marlene and Bob, and welcome to the Cafe Europa. We appreciate your being here.
All right, so I think we're supposed to put our mics on now. Can you guys hear us okay? All right. Yeah, Rob didn't point out that these are actually, his kids do hang out in cafes, but these are also two of his boys in what city is that in?
That's in Lisbon.
In Lisbon, okay. I thought maybe, I'd guessed it was in some Germanic city, but no, I guess not Lisbon. But speaking of tacos, Marlene's favorite street food, the idea of this panel really was born of me reading this New Yorker article that I highly recommend to anyone, The Unlikely Rise of the French Tacos, and it is plural, the French tacos, It is this... some people call it an abomination, but it's a large flour tortilla on which they put the meat from the kebab, sometimes merguez sausage or chicken, French fries, a melted cheese, and usually a sauce, and then they'll put it in a panini press, and it's a street food, and it's portable. It's actually really, really good. I get one every time I go to France now. They're delicious. That's how I feel about it. Read it. And in this article, they brought up the kebab wars, which in 2009, you might remember... if you've been following France or Italy for a while, that there was municipal legislation that actually passed, but they tried regional, departmental, and even nationwide legislation for the number of ethnic food restaurants you could have on a given street or in a given city. In fact, you had Pierre Minard here who succeeded in being a mayor and not allowing any more kebab shops to open. You have that cartoon there. But the doner kebab is, of course, this food that's on a spit, and it's prepared. It's North African, Greek, Balkan, Turkish in origin. It has a lot of origin, but it's the European other.
Where was it invented, the doner kebab?
I didn't know you were going to quiz me.
Berlin.
Berlin, okay. But you have these wars and also this legislation with the extreme right in both France and Italy. The extreme right in Italy, the Lega Nord, who no to couscous, yes to paella, or they like this no and yes dichotomy. Yes to the spit. Food that's on a spit that is rotisserie cooked, sure, but no to the kebab. So there was this legislation. And it kind of reminded me, of thinking back on this, to these food culture wars that we had. When I was about 6 months out on my mission, when there was this famous moment that José Bové, this Roquefort goat farmer in the south of France, tore down a McDonald's that was under construction. And of course he was arrested for it, but he was arrested and put in a wooden cart and paraded around town like a hero, as Joan of Arc was when she was arrested. And he looks like this Asterix with his character with his, Fu Manchu mustache, and he became this man that was an outward opponent to what he would call malbouffe, or bad eating. And we'll talk about good and bad eating. And of course, it doesn't start in France; it starts in Italy, as most things do, including the Renaissance that I study. 1986. This major opposition to the first McDonald's being opened not only in Rome, but in the Piazza di Spagna, this historical district that gives rise to slow food. I want Marie to circle back to this in a minute, but let's start with the working definition of what slow food is, and then I promise the slides, other than some cool pictures that will follow, we'll hear. But what is street food? So street food does exist for a very, very long time. This is not a new marker of modernity. You have these examples of Theophrastus, who was a disciple of Aristotle, calling fried fish carts uncivilized. You find food stands and carts in the ashes of Pompeii. So if we're going to have a working definition, what is street food? So street food is generally going to be inexpensive. Doesn't necessarily have to be bought from a cart or on the street, but it's inexpensive. It's filling and often very fatty. It will be served in a portable way, so it can be street. That's what makes it street, is how portable is it. And then it often will feature, not always, but often, ethnic ingredients. And we'll also circle back to this idea of ethnic and made by the cultural other. So you have the spit meats of the kebab. This is actually one of Sophia Loren's first acting credits. It's in Vittorio De Sica's film, L'Oro di Napoli, The Gold of Naples, and she plays a fried pizza street vendor in that film. You also have, of course, the waffle in Belgium, the currywurst, which I hope you have a hankering for, because we might have some in store. The pierogi, or even fish and chips in Britain, meats and food that are stuffed inside of baguettes. These are all kinds of street foods that you might come across. Anyway, I didn't mean to share that. But let's go to this idea. So the idea of slow food, and I've got the snail, and Marie will tell us more about that, was really born out of this 1986 moment. And so how is the idea of slow food, how does that emerge from Rome in 1986? And how does that become a projection of Italian national identity? And let's talk about also, we both talk about this, or all three of us talk about, how the sanctity of mealtime is something that is threatened by street food.
Well, slow food, as you say, was the spontaneous uprising, a lot like the partigiani after World War II, who just spun. There wasn't an overall kind of organization to throw the Nazis out of Italy, nor was there an organized movement at the beginning to throw the Americanized fast food out of Italy. People were spontaneously chaining themselves to buildings. They were driving their tractors down the street. It just happened as soon as people knew there was going to be a McDonald's in Piazza Spagna. And these protests went on for weeks. And one person emerged from that, Carlo Pietrini, he was a restaurateur, he was a farmer too, and he said, fast food, who wants fast food? That's nasty. There's nothing that's going to be good if it's fast food. So what we really want is slow food. So you can savor the food, so you know where the ingredients come from. And so in a very short time, just a couple of years, It was a political party. It was a movement. It was a manifesto. It had spread through all of Europe, and now it's everywhere in the world. And any place you see, anywhere you go in the world, if you see that little red snail, run. Don't walk inside, because you will have the best meal of your life if you go into a slow food establishment. And now it's, as I say, it's a political party. It's about making food sustainable and clean. It's lots of things like that. And the whole idea is that food is more than just what we eat. In the Slow Food Manifesto, it says food is a right. Good food is a right. It's a human right, like
So
the
local
freedom of speech.
sourced, heirloomed seeds and that type of thing. Okay. How does it work in Iberia? Have you seen this?
Well, Spain also has a let me move this. Spain also has a very stable restaurant culture, stable national food culture. The term street food also is a little uncomfortable when you talk about Spanish food, because there's such a stable restaurant culture, and so we think slow dining, right? There's a long tradition of slow dining, long sit-down lunches, the tradition of like the menú del día, or the tourist menu that you see at a lot of places, the tradition of late dining, also traditions associated with drinking culture and the traditions of small plates. These are very established, long-running traditions. You don't see street food as much, except for in times of holiday or festivals, which there are a lot, I guess, by U.S. standards. But interestingly, there's also been, there's not as, I think, as politicized resistance to, say, fast food, or you see lots of U.S. establishments like McDonald's and Domino's and the like. You also see these. I was curious to see lots of European-founded American restaurants. Like there was one called, I think it's Foster's of Hollywood, founded by these California brothers, and it's only in Spain. And another one called, Nebraska, the Nebraska restaurant. And it was founded in the 50s, and the quote that I read was, "We thought Nebraska was a very resonant name that reminds us of the United States." But then you also see like these immigrant associated places making inroads into the restaurant scene. So donor shops, Indian restaurants, gelato shops, French bakeries, and as a Latin Americanist coming to Spain, I was really interested to see not just terrible tacos, but really good tacos, and a lot of empanada shops, which we can talk about.
We'll look at in a little bit
in just a bit. And interestingly, there's also been some pushback to these longstanding traditions, at least since the 40s and later in the 60s, of the idea of even the late dinner time, right, and of the menú del día, which were both actually imposed by Franco, so they're dictatorial additions to Spanish culture, relatively frequent. So there's been some discussion about changing at least the late meal time, and also pushback to those suggestions.
Yeah, and it's one thing when I've been in France with my family, one thing my wife cannot stand are like the 3 hours, the 4 hour meals. But, there's something very cultural about being there and having, you don't bring out all the food. It's not like Sunday dinner the way we do it, where everything's on the table at once. It comes out in courses. It's a process. And there's something about the process of presenting the food that gives some dignity to both the food and to the event. It almost offers some sanctity to the meal. There's also in France a bar chain called Indiana, which always shocked me. That I'm from Kentucky. I don't want to go to Indiana ever, let alone when I'm in France. But, sorry.
The sanctity of mealtime in Italy became really apparent to me when I was staying with some Italian friends, and it was a fast Sunday. And at 1 o'clock, they all sat down at the dinner table with no food because it was lunchtime. And so, of course, you would still sit down and have lunch with no food because it's fast Sunday. But, we're not going to have, and they even said to me, "Aren't you going to come have lunch with us?" And I said, "I'm still fasting." And they all said, "So are we." Yeah. So we all sat down for about an hour to talk because it's lunchtime.
Did you pretend to cut?
No.
No, I grew up in Texas, and we had this wonderful tradition of Sunday dinner where everybody, even members of the church, would often go out to eat because that's what you did with your families on Sundays. And potlucks are fun because there'd be like KFC and like a mix of different contributions from other restaurants and the not.
Yeah, so let's circle back now to that idea of the ethnic other. Like, what are we scared of? What does the ethnic other mean for different nations in Europe? How does it apply to food consumption, but also to food preparation? And where does this fear come from? Is this fear founded, the fear of the ethnic other?
Well, are you thinking about the next slide?
We can.
Okay, because for Italians, that isn't food at all. And because so much of it has to do with identity, and that's the fear of the migrant coming in, as our national identity will change if people look different than the dominant group, use different terms, if they have a different phenotype, if they have a different religion, and especially if they eat that, then we really can't. We identify very much with our food. This caused a huge scandal in Italy this year because one of the most famous pizza makers, the pizzaiolo, said, you know what, nobody owns a certain food. And so if a food is good, and by that I mean we like the taste of it, objectively, let's look at this and not have all of our different prejudices about it. And he said if you get a fresh pineapple and you caramelize it, I'm not talking something out of the can in little bitty bits, but if I caramelize it and I put it not too much on this pizza, it actually is really good. And he caused a huge scandal, and he was blackballed by other pizzaioli, and other terrible things happened to him. And he has a chain of pizzerie, and they serve this pizza now. And people accused him of caving to the other, that he gave up his Italian identity to make that and sell it. And he eats it.
Yeah, I would eat it.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before, all the pretense that's involved when we use this term ethnic, right? The idea of pretending that your own tradition isn't somehow also ethnic, right? The ethnic equals other, ethnic is somehow threatening, or ethnic should be cheap. But of course, the idea of any national cuisine is a kind of fiction, right? I mean, when we talk about Spanish cuisine, we have to recognize that it's a lot older than the modern nation state, which is Spain, right? We could think about Moorish contributions, whether almonds, and you see turrón everywhere, oranges, artichokes, then elsewhere, so that mostly in the south, but elsewhere. Then we see saffron, rice, right? These arguably come from the Moorish tradition. And even the strong preference for jamón, for pork, for pig, right? It can be read as a swerve, right, away from Muslim identity, right? And also in Spain, when you think about some of the main or most beloved national meals, like the tortilla or gazpacho or just bread with tomatoes, they involve ingredients which came from Spanish America, right? And so there's a lot of pretending when it comes to talking about the purity and the sanctity of national traditions.
I've looked at a lot of 16th century cookbooks. My dissertation director at UCLA worked on those, and a lot of the ingredients, it kind of shocked you, like what was considered French cuisine in the 16th century is very different from what, again, this national imagination of what is our national cuisine. Italy with the tomato and even the potato for the gnocchi. I mean, you have these things that come from elsewhere. Eggplants,
eggplants.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to add to that for the ethnic other? We talked about Chinese food, right?
We did.
Yeah.
We talked about that, and I think there's something really revealing about how we, meaning whatever group is doing this identifying, we have to own something in order for it to be authentic. We have to identify with it. Like the tomato is inherent to Italy in the Italian imagination. It's necessary in all of these dishes. Or the idea that pasta is an Italian invention when we all know it came from China, right, originally. And this idea that authority and authenticity and ownership and purity all go together, they're all kind of a piece. I think that is part of what feels like it's at risk, and the fear comes from with ethnic food. Chinese food is really popular in Italy, as it is in lots of places, partly because it's great, and partly because it's not very expensive, and partly, I think, in Italy, it maps easily onto Italian traditions in some ways. The idea that you eat fresh food, that it's very abundant, but it's very generous.
Yeah.
That you would eat it with friends, that it's really familiar, it's vegetables and noodles, and so it maps on really easily, whereas other cuisines don't. Like Indian food does not map well onto Italian food sensibilities. I've yet to find an Indian restaurant in Italy.
Okay.
They just don't exist.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The Chinese, it's interesting in France that you have probably more, if not an equal number, of Vietnamese or Cambodian or Laotian restaurants, since that was, former Indochina, and there's almost this preference for the Asians that are ours as opposed to the Asian other. That comes out pretty interestingly in France with the Vietnamese food. I love this moment in a film I know you love also, Andrea Segre's film, Io Sono Lì, where you have the Italian men sitting around and the Chinese mafia has actually taken over this osteria, and they bring food out, and it's really good, and they like it. And one of the Italian men is kind of ashamed that he likes the Chinese food so much, and he said, it's a good thing that Marco Polo went to China and taught the Chinese how to cook. So it's just this great moment of even reversing history, that we had all the recipes and we taught them through Marco Polo. So I love this idea of even this reversal of the other.
Yeah. Can we talk about empanadas?
I would love to.
Okay. So one of the food stuffs that fed my family when we were in Spain this past summer was empanadas, and these are the Argentine empanadas. Arguably they were Spanish before they were Argentine. You can link them to like Galician tradition of empanadas that you see often in like train stations. They're very portable, on the go. And even like linguistically, I was reading that some people call the Galician ones empanadas and the Argentine ones empanadillas, but mostly just empanadas. But let's show the clip.
The video, okay.
Yeah. First let me introduce it. This is a Spanish TikToker ranking the empanadas, the Argentine empanadas from a place called Malvon. And I think it's really interesting that he uses the word, he talks about how the empanadas no paran de conquistar las calles de España. They won't cease conquering the streets of Spain. And so I read one or two articles talking about the invasion of empanadas, the reconquista, the counter conquest or reconquest of the empanadas. So we'll watch this clip and then we'll discuss.
Empanadas argentinas no paran de conquistar las calles de España y por ello he venido a Malbón, la empresa más grande de empanadas argentinas de Europa, para probar muchos sabores y contaros cuáles han sido mis 5 favoritos. En quinta posición tendríamos la de carne picante, un sabor muy clásico argentino con un picadillo picante de carne y verdura. En cuarta posición pondría la de provolone con tomate seco, una empanada gourmet con un sabor súper potente a queso y que combina perfectamente con ese tomate seco. En tercera posición la de costillas barbacoa, que sabe literalmente a lo que promete con una carne súper suave. En segunda posición la de berenjena parmesana, que te traslada a la mismísima Italia con esa increíble combinación de berenjena, tomate y queso. Y en primera posición tenemos la de cochinita, esa carne desmechada de cerdo típica de México, macerada con naranja y achiote. Y si tú también quieres probar estas empanadas, pon todos los comentarios que quieras mencionando ahora mismo, porque estamos sorteando 10 cajas de empanadas y una puede ser tuya.
I'm super mad that the Italian empanada came in number 2.
Oh, yeah.
Why is it number 2?
I don't know. We can take that up.
Eggplant Parmesan empanada.
I don't know. You do see a lot with olives. I mean, which you see in Argentina as well. But I'll admit, as someone who loves Spanish food, I don't actually even really like olives, which is kind of a problem. But I think it's interesting that they're using the language of conquest, and I also think it's interesting that you would think there would have been a long history of empanadas and taco shops in Spain, but I remember talking about this with a friend of mine who lives in Barcelona, and she said, no, this is just in the last like decade or so that we've seen the influx of these shops. And she says Spain has, and this is my friend who's Catalana, right, saying this. She's saying Spain likes to think that they gave culture, not that they have received culture from Latin America. And so there's been a kind of like resistance to, tacos and empanadas. And at the same time, the Spanish are coming to their good senses, and, good food is good food, right?
Well, like the gelato, I mean, even in Spain, the tradition of the churro or the porra. These are we would consider them potentially street food, but they are not eaten on the street. You consume those in a restaurant with your little dish of chocolate, and it's not a street food. So there is something very American and in their mind invasive about that. I think our own identity here in the United States, we're comfortable with just adopting and adapting everything. I do this language game in my French culture class where I said, name a food that's typically American, and of course you get hamburger. I was like, oh, so a seasoned beef patty from Hamburg is American, or they're like, oh, hot dogs. Oh, let's say Frankfurter or Wiener. You got Frankfurt in Vienna, so. Keep going. Pizza, yeah, sure. And eventually they do hit on some, but anyway, this idea that we're perfectly content. In fact, I think we like the experience of going out and eating ethnic food, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I think there's a certain kind of exoticizing that happens with ethnic food, but at the same time, at least in Italy, there's also a belief that ethnic food is somehow lower class than authentic Italian food. So you have this double kind of view of what street food is and what ethnic food is.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to counter this expectation that here in the United States as well, that ethnic food somehow be more affordable, or that you would pay more, no offense to pasta, but like you would pay more for like not wonderful pasta at a U.S. Italian chain than you would for, say, labor-intensive mole or something like that, right? That there are certain cuisines which we expect to be unfairly to be cheap.
Right, or really expensive, like French food, right?
Yeah.
That's always supposed to be really expensive.
And it's hard to find good French food in the United States, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So what would be the biggest intruders if we were going to kind of go around the horn and think about in your in the culture you work in? What are the biggest intruders? What are the things that really make people wince, cringe?
In Italy, I would say American fast food is still really disdained. It's not seen as something that can be adequately incorporated into the culture. It's a place young people go to hang out with their friends where they're being rebellious by eating that. And it's not a place families would go or something like that. The term that Italians use often for fast food is porqueria. Spanish speakers know what I'm talking about. The food of swine, right? Yeah. And I mean, I've had Italians say to me, I've never eaten a porqueria in my life. Have you ever given your child a porqueria? And there's this kind of, parental posturing about, would you let your child eat this porqueria? It exists. There are a lot of those kinds of chains that are owned and have Italian names and that kind of thing, but it has it's kind of been domesticated. It has its place, and it exists, not necessarily harmoniously, but it exists. And then certain, like North African food is very, very popular, but it's, again, seen as kind of something that's more suspect. It's supposed to be cheap. People eat it, but it's not considered healthy. It's really meaty, it's fatty, but people still like it. So these things have their place, but I think a lot of the prejudice parallels the prejudices toward the people who brought that food or that are associated with that food.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if those who identify as Iberianist have other opinions here, but I don't see the same sort of maybe hostility toward other cuisines, but when you think about like who gets a Michelin star or, who gets to be like kind of hot cuisine in Spain, you don't see ethnic restaurants usually getting those designations, right?
That's interesting, the Michelin star that you have a tire company that gets to be the gatekeeper for world cuisine, right? But it carries its clout. There's a lot of things that I would have said for France, but what would be seen as taboo. But you have the first Krispy Kreme opened in Paris this year and had lines wrapped around the building. They've got Steak and Shakes. For as much as Beauvais and all of the anti-globalists poo-poo McDonald's, I've never seen a line longer at McDonald's in France than anywhere in the world. I mean, it's just other than this image that Jennifer, who couldn't be with us, gave us of the McDonald's in Moscow when it first opened. But in fact, when I was the first missionary there, we had the carte orange to get around in the map. The ad that was on the map played with the all roads lead to Rome, but it was tous les chemins mènent à McDo. So like all the roads lead to McDonald's, and which is almost every metro stop had a McDonald's at it. So it's very popular in France, even though it's one of those things that you do and then you don't admit, right? And that might be kind of, I don't know, Italy seems like maybe that's the difference there.
And it's such a credit to McDonald's for their localization teams, right? What they do to make their restaurants, as much as we want to hate them, like at home in different countries.
Yeah,
right?
the Mac Poutine that you can get in Canada now. Or they did a big thing right after the Beauvais scandal. There was this movement to only use French beef and to use good, high-quality French beef, or to use only French cheeses and assure that the bread actually came from France. So there are these efforts. I mean, I think I agree with you that their localization is second to none with McDonald's. So we looked at ethnic as maybe a negative term or something that scares, but I kind of want to open the question now. How can an acceptance of ethnic food help us engender more of an acceptance in general of the humanity of the ethnic other? Can you imagine a flip side of that?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that nobody owns culture, and to recognize the fusion that's always been happening, the crossroads that have always existed, and how these foods that we identify with so much nationally there is no way to say something is purely, that we see how fallacious this idea that there's pure food or pure identity or pure nationality or something like that. I think that's one of the most important things that becomes really immediately evident when we start talking about ethnic food.
Yeah, I think it's significant that food terms are often in this category of what we might call untranslatables, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're very translatable. We literally take them in, we ingest them, but at the same time they cling tightly to their soil, right? So foods, we can just consume them, but they can also be, I think, and music may be the same way, a gateway to a deeper cultural engagement. And the Latin American tradition, there's a rich tradition, metaphorical tradition of cannibalism, right? The sacred absorption of the enemy, ingesting, taking in the other, there's something violent about that act, but also sacred, and it's a decolonizing metaphor too, because it's the idea of cannibalism was something that provided moral justification for the Europeans coming into the Americas, and so then kind of flipping it on its head and reclaiming cannibalism. I think food can be a way for a meaningful engagement, and also just consumption sometimes, but can be the gateway to more.
Yeah, it's a great comment. I again, going back to my mission in France, that we have the expression here in the United States being invited to the barbecue, where I kind of felt like working with Senegalese people that I was working with in France, or with Ivoirian people, that they'd have the fufu, the big fufu, and there's something communal about eating together, where they have the big pile of fufu with everyone sticking their hand in, and you get your sauce, and you're sticking your hand. There's something about, we say breaking bread, but even this is even beyond breaking bread. You've got your hands in the matter, and you're dining together. That I think there is something about that transcends cultural differences and is trying to build on some sameness. And I think there is a lot of beauty to being able to dine with someone else and see them as your equal and that you're consuming at the same time. I mean, that's you kind of were talking about this consumption existing almost on a cannibalistic or even a transubstantiation Christian level, but there's this idea of just basic communing with someone that happens when you're sharing the same bounty that is beautiful, and I think that's that should be our ideal that we go for personally.
Yeah, I love that.
All right.
Do we want to open it up, or we can?
Yeah, I think we can.
Questions. What's your questions?
As you're lining up, I can show just a couple more of Jennifer's images that this moving from McDonald's to taking the branding that goes from USSR to Putin. You can see there it is. You've got the Soviet flag and then the current Russian flag, and how there is this sort of rebranding that's happening and this return. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to change it.
No,
Go for it.
There's the Vkusna i Tochka, right? That's the new, since in the current climate, McDonald's has been rebranded as that, which means what is it? It's a delicious and ready, or just as it is.
Or Domino's, or the way that Starbucks appears there. And then there's this return that she wanted to point out, Jennifer, she'd been able to join us, this return to this sort of Russian peasant imagery. Again, it's our culture, not this global culture that we're giving to our people to consume.
Didn't she say the Russians think they invented pizza?
Yeah,
they claimed that.
There's this great picture with beets and herring and pickles and dill on it.
And mayonnaise.
Yeah, you often see
mayonnaise.
Oh.
They can have it.
I would eat the Italian pineapple pizza. I don't think I could eat this unless I was very, very hungry. Anyway, let's let Rob open it up to questions.
Jennifer Bown couldn't join us. She got sick, and she was going to join us and discuss. I forgot to bring that up at the beginning.
I don't want that to be.
But what we'd like to do now is to have you. I don't want to do the thing where we have you march up here and speak into the microphone and do all things. If you can be loud, if you can't, we'll try to re-speak. Go ahead and sit where you are. We'll have Professor Hudson will call on you, and feel free to join the conversation. I'm going to go out and we're going to start setting up, and then we would invite you to come join us for Currywurst, which is it's an odd one. I picked it, first of all, because I love it, and but it's also invented in Berlin, just like the doner kebab. I have to keep pointing that out. Because but you never would have gotten this until the 50s when it was invented, the late 50s, early 60s, when the Turkish immigrants started arriving and curry was available, and this was something they had there, and somebody had the great idea to stick it. It was a woman at the corner of Kantstrasse and Leibnizstrasse, named after the two great German philosophers Kant and Leibniz. And there was a little trailer there, and that's where she first came up with this idea of Currywurst, and it spread across Berlin. But it's also it's something that Germans see as theirs. But of course, it's curry, right? It comes just like Marie's been saying. It's something that people make their own, but is obviously we owe it. And just imagine London without a curry. Just imagine Berlin without Turkish food. And some of these places can do just fine without it. But some of us in Europe are really grateful for ethnic food. Thank you very, very much to our panelists, first of all.
Okay.
And we would like to open up to questions and comments. Bob, I'll leave the mediation to you. I'm going to go work on some currywurst. Come out and join us in the lobby afterwards for some currywurst. Thanks.
All right, Daryl.
If you need it.
So you've emphasized this ethnic other, but I'm thinking of colleagues in French who have studied street food starting in the 19th century, for example. That's my era. Looking at a Manet painting, for example, of a young woman eating cherries in a street. And having it associated more with class difference, a kind of hierarchy where those who are without a home, who cannot sit in a dining room, are the ones who are forced to eat food on the street in a kind of vagabond way. And I'm wondering if there's some more resonances that you could tease out of your own conversations leading up to this, or some thoughts that might add to that. And maybe another kind of nod to cannibalism, the colonizers being eaten, which I loved. But the association with specific connections, the Dutch in Malaysia or Indonesia, somewhere else. The French in North Africa. Some of the food products actually cross over, like durum wheat being essential for both pasta and couscous. And in fact, in some ways, giving the Italians the possibility, that those regions, for having foods that are national, not just from the Columbian Exchange tomatoes, but other things. But you had any more comments about that? Thanks.
I think it's a really good point because street food or people who can't afford to eat in a restaurant are the ones who have to eat outside. And so this act that's communal or private becomes public, and you can't afford privacy anymore. I think that really plays onto, it maps very quickly onto the migrant communities that are so often associated with these foods, because the idea is that they're not supposed to stay here. They're not supposed to be in the same spaces. Definitely not the same, the same places that are class distinguished. And you're making me think of that really famous scene in Ladri di Biciclette, the bicycle thieves, when this poor man and his poor son they've been searching all day to find his stolen bicycle, and they want to stop and eat. And because they're poor, they're left kind of on the margins of the restaurant. They're not given any silverware or plates. They're kind of allowed into this private space of the restaurant, but they're not. They can't be there because they don't have the money to be there. And that's kind of where the people who are associated with ethnic food often are. You're kind of left on these margins. Ironically, it's a public margin, but you're not allowed in.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and certainly there's a class component to this day. I was wondering about the space of the market that we see a lot in Portugal and Spain. As a place, there are markets that are more for recreation, for tourists, but markets can also be spaces where maybe that are a little more democratic, where people of all classes go to buy food to prepare meals at homes, whether produce or spices, but also they usually have like little tables where people can sit and eat and sample. And I don't know that there's much of a class stigma, about eating in a market.
With the ethnic other, also you get an element, and Daryl's question kind of led me to think of this and in this term. But you're almost there's an idea of slumming when you're going to eat at the street food. If you are someone who does have a table in a home, that going out to eat street food, there's almost an element of slumming when you do that. So I think the market or the class distinctions are writ pretty large when it comes to that. So thanks, Daryl. Yeah, Natercia.
So I'm Spanish.
Oh, thank you.
And I've been here for a couple of years now, and my mom, she's from the Canary Islands. We're from the Canary Islands, and a lot of times at home will be like, and I hear my grandma saying this, that this has come from my grandma, right? If we go to McDonald's, it's like, well, eso no es comida. ¿Qué comiste hoy? Eso no es comida. Like, that's not really food. Like, that doesn't count, right? And my mom, the first time she had McDonald's, it was through the missionaries, right? So it's, again, this idea of like the other coming in. And so it's very interesting because for us, again, food is, to some extent, you could say sacred. It's something that is very much a part of your identity. When you were talking about empanadas, I had this little like in my heart, like, wait, they're not originally from Spain? Like, that can't be, like, right? It's almost this like nationalistic attitude, like, we own this is ours. And so I guess my question is, I feel very passionate about food. I feel very passionate about the Mediterranean diet. I think it's one of the best diets out there. And when I think about having kids, I recognize that I might end up here in the future. And so I'm like, this is what I want my kids to eat at home. And so how do you, I guess, like, how have you seen successful ways in which people who maybe come from like another country and have a very solid tradition of eating and food, how do they navigate the fact that now they're all in a different country and they have to adjust their eating habits? Like, for me, it's odd not sitting down at a table. Like I live with like other women, and we don't eat together, and so like that's very strange to me. So like, what are positive ways in which you can adapt or appropriate features from other cultures especially when you're living in another country, but still retaining that aspect of like your identity when it comes to food and eating. And I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, it
That,
definitely
that
makes
might be a,
sense. Yeah,
that might be a
great
question for the audience.
Yeah, that's just
I'm looking at the people in the audience and I'm thinking, there are people here qualified to answer
That's
that.
a wonderful question, and thank you for your comment. I'm come at it mostly as a Latin Americanist, looking in an American, U.S. United Statesian looking at Spain. But yeah, I like the idea of the audience taking that. But I was just thinking about one thing I loved when I was in Spain and we shopped at markets and ate at certain restaurants. That like I had a better sense of where my food came from. Right, and eating in season and knowing where the ingredients were sourced. I wish we had a greater sense of that here as consumers, eaters in the United States.
But Natasha, just to answer your question more directly, I think the idea of the sacrality of mealtime, that if you emphasize that with your family, I know my friends and co-panelists well enough to know that that mealtime is important for their families, and you have family heirloom recipes and recipes you picked up on your mission or you picked up abroad, and you make sure that your family's aware of that. I think this awareness and making mealtime be a sacred time. I'm grateful that I have my wife's Guatemalan and her family does that too, where mealtime is a time that you get together with your family and you appreciate the food that's there. And one thing I like, and even prayers that my wife offers, she's not just thankful for the food, but the labor and effort that went to bringing the food to the table. It's this respect for the people and the hands that work, not just to prepare, not just mom that cooked it, but the people that planted the seeds and harvested it and sweat and labor to allow you to have that abundance. Yeah, Aaron.
So I have a story that has stuck with me. My mom grew up in a Latino community on the border. Oh, thank you. And from a Latino family. And as new U.S. Citizens in this border city, she saw young children her age eating ice cream on the street. And she said, I want to participate in that. And her being told, no, we don't eat on the street. And we don't eat that thing. We eat at home, we eat our nice food, we don't do that. But for her, she always expressed to me later that it wasn't just that she wanted that food, it's that she wanted to participate in something that was new and it symbolized like a freedom and adventure, and I wonder if sometimes when we're looking at our study abroad students and they're experiencing this new thing and they experience this street food and they're having this new sensation. I mean, growing up in a very traditional family, I don't think I ever ate most ethnic foods outside of what American or Mexican food that our family made until I was in college and I moved away from home and I started trying new things. But can you talk a little bit about this experience of the street food or the ethnic food, and it's a little bit of the freedom or the temptation of the forbidden, or a little bit about that and how that influences young culture?
That's a good question.
Very good question, Aaron. Thanks.
And I don't want to get too autobiographical. Those of you who know my daughter know she shouldn't be used as an example for anything. But when she was younger, she very much wanted to have that experience of eating what other people eat. And for all the reasons that you talk about. And I think those things often have to do with how we understand otherness and how we talk about otherness. And I think it's really important, at least it was for us with Corinne, to teach her not to disdain other people's tastes. If those people want to have Pop-Tarts, they can have Pop-Tarts, right? That's their choice. Okay, she still does disdain it. But how you navigate that experience is I think it's very complicated, and I think children experience that differently than say parents do. So. Non-answer.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us. And